Welcome to Messy Liberation,
This is our special Everything is Political series.
where we're going to help you draw the connections between your everyday life and the world around you.
Let's get started. Welcome back to our series, Everything is Political. Thank you for being here. And today we have Dacy Gillespie of Mindful Closet, who I happen to know IRL, which is one of the very few people I know IRL because I'm such a hermit. But when we were talking about topics, I was like, oh, we should talk about clothes and fashion. And I immediately thought of you, obviously, because of the work you do and the way you approach your work that is very much liberation minded. So I'm really excited to have you here. And to start, we're just going to ask you, when did you, what was the thing or the time that made you realize fashion/clothing? And I know those, I don't know, we'll see if you think those are two separate things, but when did you sort of start to realize that the industry you're operating inside of is political?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here with both of you. You sent me that question ahead of time, and I started thinking about all the stuff I'm doing now, but then I started thinking a little further back and a little further back and a little further back, and I realized I have this unique experience of being raised by two activists, and for a time they were labor organizers. My mom worked in a sewing factory, and she was organizing workers in the sewing factory. So which was when I was very little, preschool age and early elementary school. And so I always knew that clothing was political. I knew that it was political in the way that it related to humans and labor rights. And, so that's the very first time. But then kind of throughout my childhood and my being raised by my parents, somewhat to my detriment, I was taught that clothing is something that's somewhat shameful to think about. It's really, if you're an idealistic person or a community-minded or activist-minded person, it's something that's superficial. You shouldn't be spending time thinking about it. You should be devoting all of your time, to helping other people. So there was that facet of it. As I did get more interested in clothing, I started reading fashion magazines and reading about high fashion. And, I'm talking when I was like 10, I just loved it. And that was very clearly a whole other stratosphere of clothing. I mean, when they would note the prices, for some of the items and the little captions, I knew that was certainly a world that I probably would never belong to, just based on class and financial resources and elitism and all the other things that high fashion can represent. So there was that layer. Also, it's crazy. I started writing this all down because there were so many facets that kept coming to me. So the other thing is that my parents were anti-capitalist and anti-consumerist. And so they were also very frugal. Obviously, neither of them was making a lot of money doing what they did. And, so not only were clothes superficial to think about, but it was also something we didn't have money to spend on. And it was also something that, again, it was kind of the man trying to manipulate us. So I knew that very early on, and that did not deter me from loving it. There was one point in time where I got really into, it's embarrassing, but I was probably 13. Okay, so give me that. But I got really into collecting the shopping bags from different mall stores. And then I would put the shopping bags on my wall, as decoration. And I don't remember my parents making a fuss about it. So that's to their credit. But, it's wild how even the way I was raised, it still infiltrates. You still want what the in crowd has.
I could even see it being as a form of rebellion almost, though, too,
Yeah,
in a way,
it might
right?
have
We
been.
all kind of reject what our parents, we go through
Yeah.
that phase, but obviously it's not a
Yeah.
phase for you, but
Yeah.
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 And I know you pretty well, Dacy, and I did not know your mom worked in a sewing factory. I knew your parents were activists, but I didn't know that about the sewing factory. So it's just amazing, how you can know somebody for years and years and
Yeah, I
still
know.
discover things. It's amazing. And
Yeah.
how this does seem like, in a way, it's kind of in your bones. Well,
Mhm.
I'm curious because you started, so we've known each other, what, I don't know, 13 years or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, long time.
And when you were starting your business, as I think you called yourself a personal stylist, Mindful
Mhm.
Closet was personal styling, working with people to find clothes that they felt good in. And I feel like that was always sort of your ethos, is finding things that you feel good in versus what's trendy, what's flattering, all of that. I think that from the start has always sort of felt like you. And still, it feels like over time, your work has evolved in the last decade plus,
Yeah.
has gotten even more into that, firmly in that place, and to the point of I think you may be kind of even sort of rejecting the term stylist or feeling
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable with it. So I'm just kind
Mm-hmm.
of curious, how has your work evolved from where you started with quote unquote personal styling to where you
Yeah.
are now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I still call myself that because after 13 years, still can't come up with a better term for people to know what I do when I say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
If someone has 10 minutes, I can explain more. So yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, that's the first thing I thought of when you asked about, how is this political? Because I did start my business in 2013. It was kind of the height of the minimalism movement, and I was very enthusiastic about that, and still am. I unfortunately live with 3 maximalists, but I still like to have fewer things. So I really thought I was going to go into women's closets, kind of teach them the ways they had been trapped by consumerism and trends and things by looking at what they had, clearing that stuff out, and then helping them buy things, quote, mindfully. But what I realized very, very early on was that not one woman whose closet that I went in could do any of that without addressing her feelings about her own body.
Mm.
And so that's when it really shifted for me from being about clothes to being about body liberation, body acceptance, getting more connected in fat activism movements and all of those kind of things. So that was the real big turning point for me.
It was funny when you mentioned being 13 and like collecting the shopping bags. Like it took me back to that first day of school,
Mm-hmm.
when everyone was coming in with like, well, not everyone, but it felt like everybody was coming in with a new wardrobe. And depending on what your wardrobe looked like, right? It was a clear indication of like your class, right? Like if your family could afford to buy you new school clothes, right? And so I just remember so many years being 12, 13, 14, wanting so much to be that student that walked in with like a week's worth of new clothes for like school, and not being able to do that. But I think also like even at that young age, like, that desire to like be a part of that group, right? Like we can talk about that in terms of like having not just access, but also the lure of like the proximity to a certain type of like power that comes from social class, right? And reputation and influence and things like that, that marketers and brands really prey on when it comes to the way that they sell their clothing and whatnot. I'm just listening to you talk. First of all, just you have an amazing voice.
Thank
Like I
you.
just feel just like really lulled, really, really grounded here talking to you about this. You have a really good podcast voice. But it just brings to mind for me, just like I love pretty things
Mm-hmm. Same.
so much, so much. And I'm not a minimalist, right? Like you see my
Yeah.
background, like I have a lot. This isn't even half of what's in this tiny office right now behind me and around me. But like one of my core values is beauty, right? And obviously we can go really deep with that, right? Like the beauty of people and the world, but also like just the beauty of things. And that's something that I am learning to come to terms with, because trying to be anti-consumerist while also just liking things and not feeling guilty about it. And growing up in like a super religious household where it was
Mm-hmm.
like poverty is piety and you shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
want things, right? You should, suffer and withhold pleasure from
Oh my
yourself.
gosh. Yeah.
And so like dealing with all of that while also acknowledging that like it's okay for me to have nice things, right? That's not a bad thing in and of itself. Like that has been such a point of tension in my own journey and development. And like when you work with clients, right, who maybe have similar circumstances or have similar beliefs about what it means to buy something for themselves that they want, but maybe they don't feel like they deserve, or it's quote unquote unnecessary. Right? Like it's a want, it's not a need. So why should you get it for yourself? How do you have that conversation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much. It's lovely to hear you talk too. And I really, really identify with 2 things that you said. One, the love of beauty. Like I do feel very strongly about my surroundings and how I want them to look. And again, that's not always maybe something that I grew up thinking was okay. My parents had nothing on the walls. All the furniture was old and hand-me-downs and, they're just different kind of people. and that's fine. And then the other thing you said was, I didn't grow up in a religious household, but definitely the prevailing thinking was, I don't know how to describe this, but you did a better job. But yeah, pleasure is not something that we look for, and kind of suffering it almost shows that you're a good person.
Mhm.
Right? It's a morality. So I very much identify with that so much. And I do think beauty is important. And, I have two types of clients. I have the type of clients who are like, I just want to get dressed every day. I don't really care as long as it's functional and I semi like how it looks. I just want you to kind of solve this for me.
Mhm.
And then I have another kind of client that really loves clothes and fashion, has had struggles kind of embodying that love because of various reasons, some of which we've mentioned and also typically body size. I think that so many women are conditioned to take care of everyone else before themselves that I think it's actually almost like an exercise that every woman should be forced to do,
Right.
to say like, you deserve something beautiful. You deserve clothes that fit. You do it for your children. You do it for your husband. Why not you? And I think that is something that really changes and shifts things for women, particularly.
We've mentioned body size and shape and the privilege that comes with that. We've mentioned class and how that plays a role in clothing. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about professionalism. And because I think
Mhm.
that brings into the equation some of the issues around race as well, because all of these intersecting identities are at play with clothing. And I think we think it's something that's super functional, right? It's just to keep our body clothed, warm, covered so we can go about our days. And yet there's all these layers to what clothing means in our day-to-day lives. And I think one of the places where that's most sort of pronounced and the spotlight is most on it is in the workplace and these ideas around professionalism. And I know you have lots of thoughts on that. And kind of, I think it's a great way of showing some of the ways that
Yeah.
clothing is political.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Becky. And we kind of mentioned earlier kind of this sense of that first day of school outfit and wanting to belong and wanting to be close to, power. And so one thing that I'm constantly thinking about and constantly referring back to is Sonia Renee Taylor's ladder of bodily hierarchy, right? And at the very top is a white man. And, any deviation from that standard, whether you're a woman, whether you have curly hair, whether your skin is different color, whether your body size is not the ideal, quote ideal, obviously, the further down the ladder you get. And to survive, some of us have to, make some of those accommodations because we would be discriminated against and not be able to perhaps take care of ourselves or our families. But, when you really think about it, and it's funny, I've gotten asked to do so many times, I've volunteered for Dress for Success for years. And sometimes I get asked to do these little workshops about, can you please come and tell our kids like what is, how to look professional at a job? And I started thinking about it more and just realized, which I mean, this is not a new idea, but what we think of as professionalism in the workplace is basically look as much as possible like a white man, right?
Yeah.
Wear a suit, have hair that is tamed and close to your head, have, wear makeup, but not too much, just basically be kind of a blank box or like a blank
Mhm.
slate. And I wanna reject that, and also, like I said, some of us have to conform to the world that we live in. We don't live in an ideal world, but, yeah, I mean, really, that really shows, I think, the level of white supremacism that does permeate our choices about clothes, right? It's like we may think, "Oh, this is what people have told me is professional," but why? Why is that professional, right? Why are Black women being punished for wearing their hair natural? Why are people being discriminated against because of the size of their body? Those things are political, and when we're not allowed to show up as we are, we're being punished for just existing, and that's political.
Yeah. I think that also brings to mind for me, like, people who, um, might, like, immigrate or migrate to a different country, right? And their clothing, the cultural aspects of their clothing could be very different. I've definitely have been in work situations, right, where the way that someone dressed was not, quote, unquote, "professional" according to, like, the white male American standard because of cultural differences. And, sometimes that's an issue, right? It brings to mind, like in France, I don't know if this ever passed, but I know some years ago they were trying to pass that law where it was like illegal to wear a hijab in public. And it's like, like how, because, their reasoning or their logic was like, it's hard to identify people, right? If you're wearing a hijab and it's like, well, one, people's memories about what people look like are never as accurate as we think they're going to be, if there is, a crime that happens, but also like that's a cultural and religious thing that turns really quickly into oppression, right? And so how do you I don't even know what what question I have about that, but
Yeah.
I remember, like, going once I got hired, I was working at a hotel and I got hired. For the interview, I wore my hair curly, and the
Mm.
hiring manager was like, "Make sure you straighten your hair when you come into work." And so, because it was, like, this, like, boutique hotel in the middle of the city, like, next to a theater where there were, like, all kinds of productions happening all the time, and so there was a certain aesthetic, right, that they were trying to maintain, right? But even growing up as a child with, like, my wild, unruly hair, like, the goal was always to, like, blend in, right, as much as possible. So, I guess the question is, like, how do we balance, like, if you are in a situation, right, where you have to do those things, then where's how do you figure out where their line is, right, where you're
Yeah.
giving too much?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just wanna underscore some of that too, that it's all about conformity, right? And really oppressing anything that makes us different. Um, and women and people of color have to perform this to a higher level. They have to make more effort or else they'll be penalized. And so, I think it depends on a lot of different factors, right? I had a client recently who was a Black woman who had moved. She was in a corporate environment, but she had moved from the East Coast to a corporate environment in Texas, and she said it was just really different there. There was this what you might typically imagine as, like, Texas beauty standard, but she was very high up and very much an expert in her field, and so we were talking about, like, how can you come in and just kind of define and set a standard and a model for, "This is me, I have what it takes to do this job, and I'm not gonna look like the rest of the people here." And again, she was lucky that she was in a position of power and able to do that, and we talked a lot about her being able to, because she really was torn. She was like, "Do I just try and look like everybody else, or do I let these aspects of myself out that I wanna express? Like, I want to wear a different style of clothing and all these things." And we were talking about how she could potentially be someone that younger women or, younger people below her could see as an example of someone doing, quote, professionalism in a different way, because the professionalism should refer to your work,
Yeah.
right? And, so she, did feel empowered to start doing that. And then there are other situations where people have to mask a little bit, for fear of violence sometimes. Obviously, I mean, there's so many people who are trans or, I think of Trayvon Martin. I mean, there's so many times where physical violence could harm you if you're dressing in a certain way. In those cases, I wish it could be different, but it's not. And I think it's just like a case by case, day by day calculation. Someone recently mentioned, I was in a live conversation, and one of the comments came in and said it's almost like code switching. And I had never heard that, and I thought that really made a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I like that you also brought up Trayvon Martin because the whole reason that that incident happened was because of what he was wearing, the time of day, and then in the neighborhood. He didn't think he was dressed appropriately because he was
Right.
wearing a gray hoodie. But I also want to point out, when we talk about like the threat of violence, like yes, physical violence, but I think um just the violence against someone's personhood, right? Which can sometimes look like not getting a promotion, not getting hired for a job, getting written up for quote unquote not looking professional, or like missing out on opportunities and access to things that can help you and your family, if you have a family, thrive. Like that is the type of violence as well that we all sometimes people don't understand that as a type of violence, but socially speaking, it is, right? Violence is anything that is harmful towards someone else, towards someone's personhood, whether it's physical or not. Were you going to ask something, Becky?
Well, no, I was just gonna say, like, so much of this is also why I think I just wanna wear sweats head to foot, which is what I'm
Hmm.
wearing today. I got a sweatshirt, sweatpants.
Hmm.
I was like, "We're talking to Daisy today about fashion and clothing, and I'm gonna show up the way I show up," right? Which I know you appreciate, Daisy, but
Yeah.
it does get you thinking about, like, those choices that you make when you're standing in your closet and knowing that they affect how people will perceive you, and then also sometimes how you're going to feel about yourself inside of your own skin. I mean, I think every woman, I think, and probably not just women to be clear, but I think this tends to fall more squarely on women, where we have that moment of standing in the closet and just looking at the things that we have and that feeling of anything I put on, I'm not gonna feel good in my skin, right? And wanting to feel comfortable, especially I think women of a certain size, when you are not able to shop in a regular store where, you can go from 0 to 12, maybe the tops of what's usually available in straight size clothing. And just that feeling of like, so then I'm just gonna wear what makes me at least feel comfortable, even if I don't feel good. And often the messaging that we're getting from people is, well, here's how to choose what's gonna make your body what's flattering for your body, right? To make your body look better, and in that way, you're gonna feel better. And I get that impulse to a degree, but your book that you have coming out, she's writing a book that's coming out when, next year?
Next year. Yeah.
Next year, called is gonna be called Unflattering, and that's the name of your newsletter on Substack, which we'll also link to. You've really kind of tried to take ownership of that word of, like, unflattering instead of this falling in this idea of flattering, and I'm curious why that is and what that like, why flipping that on its head feels good and right to you, because I think it
Mm.
relates to so much of this.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. First, I just want to refer back. One thing about that professionalism conversation that I don't want to forget to say is that I do think it's on those of us with privilege, white women, women who are straight sizes, to try to push those boundaries of what is considered professional so that we can make a little space in, again, what's acceptable so that other people can kind of come along and feel a little safer. Yeah, so the word unflattering just really, for me, it embodies a rejection of so many things. It embodies a rejection of typically, westernized and ideal standards of beauty and ideal body. Most women do spend a lot of time and effort and a lot of angst, really, trying to figure out how they can look thinner, how they can use their clothes to look thinner. And what I would really love to see, which I won't see in my lifetime, but maybe someday, is that women prioritize their comfort in their body, how they feel in their body, and expressing their own kind of aesthetic sensibility over making their body look smaller. I think that should really be the last thing that we think about, and yet it's the first thing. And most people don't even think about their preferences because they just want to be told, wear this, it'll make you look thinner.
Speaking of thinner, and because that just has me thinking about something else that's been on my mind a lot lately and probably yours. In this day and age of GLP-1s, and I'm not here to cast judgment on medication. I think where it's needed and where it's helpful, like, that's fantastic, and I use medication for, my mental health, and I'm grateful that it's available. That said, in the day and age that there's now medication that can help with weight loss, we are seeing a real shift in the last year or so, maybe even a little longer. It's a return to sort of a 90s aesthetic that profoundly affected how I felt about my body as a young woman. And I think Dacy and I are similar in age, and Taina. We're all sort of a similar age where it probably affected all of us, that, like, quote unquote heroin chic, super, super, super skinny,
The waif life.
airily so, yeah,
Yeah.
thing that I think all of us were so happy to see go. I don't love the Kardashians, but I sure as heck was happy about this. Like, let's bring round back. Let's bring, and we're seeing this really sort of, I think, scary return to these really unrealistic, even with GLP-1s, expectations around body size. And I'm just wondering, like, what your thoughts are on that right now as you're seeing that same thing return, kind of maybe your perspective on having lived through it once and what the fears you have around that.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. Some of them around, how it's affecting the people I work with or the people who read my stuff. And I did a piece back in the fall where I interviewed 4 women uh, who had been on and are on a body liberation journey, right? Where they have worked and spent lots of energy, lots of studying to try and unlearn those ideas that we learned in the 90s. And then they are being put on GLP-1s for really necessary reasons. They had all tried everything else. Like none of these people wanted to be on a GLP-1. A lot of them had come to a place of peace with their bodies, with their larger bodies. And so there's just this real confusion and lots of mixed emotions about, potentially going back into a smaller body when you've spent so much work trying to unlearn that smaller is better.
Mhm.
So there's that piece of it. Just personally and for the world, I'm terrified. I think it's terrible. I think it's awful. It literally makes me want to cry. I just hope that it seems to me that Gen Z is a little more aware than we were in the 90s
Mm.
of the alternative versions of how you can look at bodies. And there are so many of us who have woken up to that over the course of our lifetimes, who are hopefully being models for young people and teaching young people. So I hope there's a little bit more of a stronghold than there was back then. But in general, yeah, I have nieces who are teenagers. I have neighbors who are teenagers, and it's not good.
Yeah, it's really scary. It's really scary. But, obviously, like, also just a clear indication of how, like, beauty standards are just rubbish, because they will just continue to change. And I think I'm sure this has been studied. I can't cite anything about it, but knowing what I know about, what things get studied and like these kinds of spaces, just the correlation about where the role that literal politics plays and like how beauty standards change and fluctuate over time. Because we're seeing here in the US and also in other countries abroad such a sharp move toward conservatism that is steeped in white supremacist ideologies, idea of women taking up less space, right? Not just physically, but also in the political space and in the home and outside of the home by having rights stripped away, by what is considered ideal about how a woman should look and how they should behave and the role that they play in society. All of those things are interrelated in some ways. I wanted to see if we can talk a little bit about the role of modesty in clothing and fashion. Just because, again, growing up super religious,
Mhm.
like that was a really big ideology, right? That I grew up with. That it's like you shouldn't want new clothes or new things or nice things, because that was too much of a temptation or whatever the case may be, but also like the idea that like women were responsible for the morality of men by how they dress, right? And which now in hindsight I'm like, oh, that's victim blaming, right? That ties into this whole concept of like victim blaming when a woman gets assaulted and the first question people think of is, well, what was she wearing, right? So can you talk a little bit about how that shows up in your work and like what does that mean? What does modesty mean?
What does it mean to you?
I have no fucking idea.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of one thing, which is because I was just looking this up earlier when we talk about professionalism. The Missouri House, because Dacy and I are both in St. Louis, a couple of years ago passed a rule that women, interestingly, they didn't say anything about men, but because I suppose men typically are wearing suits. But anyway, women had to have their shoulders covered. Still do, I believe. I don't think they've changed that. So you have to wear a blazer or a cardigan if you're going to be on the floor in Missouri House. And that to me is some of that like modesty stuff that what's the sight of my bare shoulders
Yeah.
does that mean I cannot effectively write laws or debate someone because my shoulders are going to what does the sight of my bare shoulders do? That to me is what I think of when I think of that modesty stuff, is like how much skin can I show before it causes others problems, and what does that mean? I don't know, because that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because, like most topics that come up around clothing, I think it's a really individual choice that we get to make and that we get to decide about, right? So, you were taught, this is the way that you have to dress. I mean, there were external rules just telling you these are the rules. And I think many people rebel from that. And I think then there are also people who maybe didn't grow up that way, but who also feel a little safer, a little more covered up. And should they not have to feel that way in this world? Of course, that would be, again, that would be ideal. That is not the world we live in. And so I think modesty it can be harmful and it can be helpful. I mean, again, it comes down to our ability to choose for ourselves and this is one of my big, kind of overarching themes is that no fashion expert, no external voice can tell you what you should be wearing. That is for you to decide. And if you decide that you would rather, should you be able to walk down the street with your boobs out and not be harassed? Of course. Is that going to happen? Probably not. And so you have the right to choose, that you can still be a feminist and still cover your boobs because you just don't want to fucking deal with it. So it's a tough issue.
Look at Chapel Roan and the Grammys. For anyone who saw, she showed up in a dress that was able to be moved in a way where her breasts were exposed, and the outrage over that, where, and you could talk time or place, but Grammys are not the Oscars, and the general idea of fashion at the Grammys is boundary pushing, is stuff that's supposed to be edgier, more interesting. And I think there probably have been cases, I don't know, but I bet there have been men who have shown up at the Grammys red carpet without a shirt, because it's that kind of place, and it's okay, but not okay for her. And so the double standard, and just around modesty or any of these things that we're talking about, there's these what's okay for certain people and not other people. How much skin is a Kardashian allowed to show without receiving blowback versus, Chapel Roan, who's queer, or, someone else who's Black, or someone has no privilege, financial privilege. And I wanted to ask another question about financial privilege, because you mentioned being a minimalist. And I know that you have had some strong feelings about fast fashion. And also, I feel like there's I've just watched you continue to evolve over the years, and
Yeah.
and I love it. I love learning from
Thanks,
you. I
Becky.
love the way you show up in the world. And I know how you are now is not the same as you are a decade ago, or 15 years ago, and I hope none of us are the same as we were a decade ago, right?
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
goal is that we learn and grow. And I feel like you've come to a place of saying and honoring there are people inside of your industry who can get very, in the same way I think it is in every industry, can get really rigid about you suck or failing if you participate, if you're buying from Shein or Temu or wherever the places are that are doing that fast fashion kind of stuff, Forever 21, then you're a horrible person, right? Without any acknowledgement of that's lovely. And I don't have the skills, ability, equipment to make my own clothes. And also that's not cheap either. And I don't have the money to go buy from, a place in the US that's not using any kind of child labor and all of the things. And what am I have to put clothes on my body. And if I don't show up looking a certain way at work, I'll get fired, and it gets even worse. And I feel like you've been softening on, not that you were ever militant to that degree, but I think, you feel strongly. And I agree. If we could, in a perfect world, we wouldn't be buying from fast fashion. We wouldn't be buying from Nike. We wouldn't be buying from places that are exploiting labor. And we don't live in that world. And so how do you go about balancing that? And what do you feel about that sort of more hard line, you're doing it wrong?
Yeah. Well, just note, I've kind of always had this stance, which is your mental health and your feeling good in your body is the top priority for me. Sometimes we have to get to that by doing things that in an ideal world we might not do, but if we're going to change anything in this world, we cannot do it if we can't leave our house because we don't have clothes that fit, right? So that is always my top priority. And that means that, there's going to be, it's almost so obvious that but we're going to buy clothes from Target and Old Navy, and that's going to happen. Our world is not set up for us to make different choices a lot of the time. People in certain size ranges don't have the same options, People with certain financial restraints don't have the same options. We cannot put this standard on everyone and expect everyone. It's just the same thing as food, right? It's you can't expect someone who lives in a food desert to eat all organic and grow their own food. It's the systems. As always, it comes back to the systems of oppression, right? The systems are what need to be changed, not our individual behaviors. We are trying to operate in this fucked up system, and we're doing the best we can. However, should you be buying 20 things from Shein at a time? No. You know, if you can go to your local thrift store and find things in your size, great. You know, there are affordable ways around that. But again, just like I don't take my silverware everywhere I go, I'm not going to be perfect in this regard either. And I don't expect that of anybody.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the size thing because I think financial constraints are a really big one for a lot of people, but also for people in bigger bodies. Sometimes it's just hard to like find clothing that fits that you feel good in at stores that are generally geared towards straight sized people,
Even thrift
especially
stores.
even thrift
Oh, yeah,
stores.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Thrift stores, good quality clothing, like a lot of really quality, like quote unquote brands, or fashion houses, whatever you want to call them. Like they don't make clothing that fits people in bigger bodies. Like one of my favorite pair of pants I bought from a fast fashion retailer online. And, because one, they're super cute. They have mushrooms on them. And every time I wear them, I get compliments. And they're like, everyone always loves them. Not that that's why I wear them, but I love mushrooms. But the actual fungus, not the drug. Just want to clarify that because sound bites. But yeah, so there have been times, where I'm just like, I need something or I want to like buy something for myself. My options are limited, like so limited. And I try to, I don't know if this makes any sense, but like in my mind, I'm like, well, if the price is a little bit higher than some other fast fashion, then maybe it's a little bit more equitable. Like maybe, you know what I mean? Like you just try to make it make
Well,
sense in my
Also,
head.
what are
And
you
so I'm
supposed
yeah.
like,
to do? Once your clothing has an X in it, I have learned this as my body has gotten larger, like, your options become incredibly limited.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, there's 2 things I wanna throw out real quick. One is I do just wanna refer people to Aja Barber's work. She's a Black woman who lives in England now. She's American, and she writes a lot about this issue. And one thing that I'm grateful to her for is for highlighting the financial realities of the people making our clothes. And so just trying to remember that it kinda goes people are being oppressed on both ends. Sometimes that's just a nuance that I want to mention. The other thing is that, yes, in terms of size scarcity, just a few weeks ago, a British brand called Lucy and Yak decided to remove their size 4X. So I just kind of put something out because as a stylist, I keep a spreadsheet of brands that I refer to. If I'm working with somebody who has like a quirky, colorful style, I'm going to go and sort my spreadsheet by style and then size range. And on that spreadsheet, I have close to 300 brands. I'd say 100 plus are plus size that carry up to 3X. But then when you get to 4X and above, it's like 50 brands. And when I say brands, I'm talking like Woman Within and Lane Bryant and like maybe not the ideal brands for someone that I'm working with. And Lucy and Yak was one of those brands. And so just to highlight, like by taking that size range away, they also it's just I don't know, it's just when you think of it from a personal level, like, okay, I'm gonna have one less brand to tell my clients about, or someone is gonna have one less option. It is important. It is important. And yeah, I
Yeah,
don't really
because
know
then
where
you're
I was
left
going
saying,
with that.
"Here's your 10 muumuus you can choose from and good luck,"
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's the
Yeah.
yeah.
other thing. Like usually it's like brands who do make, clothing for non-straight size people. It's definitely not my style of clothing. Like
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's fugly. Like
Let's
I'm
give
just
a
Yeah.
like,
shout
I'm
out to
not
Christian
wearing
S
that.
I wanna give a shout out to Christian Siriano. I know nothing about fashion, but I know that I keep seeing over and over again the most lovely plus
Yeah.
size women in Hollywood showing up in his work, and he makes things for their bodies, and they're not things that
And
I say
yeah.
God love Melissa McCarthy, and I know her body has changed, but years ago, like, there would be times where I'd see her shop, I'm like, "Oh, like, no, there's no one making clothes to make her look amazing," and now I see people showing up where I'm like, "That is, like, stunning," and there just aren't enough people who I don't know I don't know why, well, I know why. All the reasons we're talking about, why they just don't care to bother trying, saying, "Does this actually" forget about flattering, but, like, do you feel good in it? And you're not
Yeah.
gonna feel good in something that feels like you're wearing a tent.
A
Like, that just
curtain. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's making you want to feel good.
Yeah.
Well, and DC, another group of people that I think because we're talking a lot here about, like, who's being left out, who's being denied, and I think in our society that another group of people we haven't talked a lot about is aging folks.
Mm,
Um, because when we talk about beauty standards, it's obviously white male, like you said, at that top of that pyramid, but age is another big factor in that pyramid. And so the older you get and the more marginalized identities you hold, the more you become a ghost in our society. And I think women often experience that where suddenly you turn whatever it is for you, 40, 50, 60, but there's some number in there where I think every woman, no matter how much she has held on to the other ideals of like, so you could have a bunch of other beauty standards that are, typical, the quote unquote ideal. So you could be white, you can be thin, you can have privilege, you can have all those things, but eventually, now I'm
Well,
thinking
yeah.
now I'm thinking of the Jenner lady, but in general, unless you have access to a lot of plastic surgery, you're going to age out of the beauty standard. What do you see? And I know you've talked a lot about your own journey too of aging and your body changing during this, as we go through perimenopause and into menopause after having babies, all of these things that happen to women's bodies. What are the things that women talk to you about with their experience of aging and how that affects how they're feeling about themselves? Also based on just what's available to them with clothing and what they think they're allowed to wear and those sorts of.
Yeah, well, this is definitely something that is personally affecting me, right now, and it's a real shock to the system, and I think the real issue is that we are not taught that bodies will change and that faces will age. It's like you see grandmas, but you never connect that to you. You never think like that's going to be me one day. I had so much entitlement. I was like, I'll never let that happen to me. But guess what? Bodies don't listen. But yeah, it's really tough. I mean, it's interesting because I am working with a client right now who is just having this really hard time with aging. And her body's changed a little bit, but it's really mostly the aging for her. And what we uncovered was that she was very privileged when she was growing up. She was like a California beach girl, like stereotypical, thin, blonde, athletic, and she never had to make effort to be conventionally attractive. And so what is really kind of slapping her in the face right now is like, I don't like how I look, but I also don't want to make the effort. I'm not used to making effort. So how do I reconcile, not necessarily loving how I look right now and, also not wanting to make the types of efforts that some other women might choose. For instance, she's letting her hair go gray, right? And she is getting so much pushback from the people around her. It's just unbelievable. People are literally saying like, when are you going to dye your hair? You're not going to leave it gray, are you? And she happens to have 2 teenage daughters. And so she also has always considered herself kind of a, I don't know, rebel's not a great word, but, kind of someone that made her own choices and operated a little bit out of the mainstream. And so what we've done is we've applied that to this issue to say, I'm choosing not to make that effort. I'm choosing not to dye my hair. These are choices I'm making because I don't believe women should have to do that. And that is helping her feel like really proud of herself and really kind of in control of the situation. And then another just like real tactical thing we've done is like collected a lot of images of aging women, right? Because like we just don't see it enough. So I was like, here's a bunch of aging California beach girls, right? Like they're out there, they exist. Let's look at them and appreciate the life that's visible in their faces. And, it's going to be hard for her. It's hard for me. But those are a couple of the things that we're trying to think about.
What is it you want people listening or watching to walk away with from this conversation? What do you want them to keep thinking about?
After talking about some of the issues facing women today, I think what's really important, maybe for people to take away, is just to realize that every little tiny action you take makes an effect. It makes a ripple effect and it does matter. And I'm talking about things like if one time you restrain yourself from saying a negative comment about your body, amazing. That's like one time that maybe someone around you won't hear that and take it, to think about their own body. Or if you decide not to let your hair go gray, just any kind of thing that you can do that pushes back against all of those patriarchal standards, I think is really worthwhile. And I think that's the only way we're going to keep from letting the magnification of everything take over. So, be proud of yourself when you do those tiny little things. They are making a difference.
Well, then I'll show off my gray here because I have been doing letting my hair go gray. It's taking longer than I actually kind of want or would have hoped, but I'm trying to do my part. And I appreciate you being here, Dacy.
Oh, thanks for
Yes,
having
thank
me.
you for this.
Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
Taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.